3.5 billion years ago, a biochemical miracle took place on a young primeval Earth. In the archaic pool of organic molecules that floated across the Earth's surface, a curious entity began collecting atoms from its surroundings to build itself. It developed the capacity for self-replication, and soon there were multiple copies of this molecule adrift in an ocean of its own building blocks. The evolutionary leap came when this molecule encapsulated itself in a membrane to form a cell, distinguishing itself from its surroundings, its inside from its outside, self from other, and life on Earth had begun. We don't normally think of nutrition as the study of how self and other become one, but that's really what it is. Molecules from our environments temporarily hitch a ride inside of us, becoming parts of our bodies before we let them go and let them continue their journeys through other organisms. And the way that these nutrients cycle between organisms is a lot like how blood circulates through our bodies. And the way that these nutrients flow gives rise to a self-regulating biosphere that we call Gaia. If we zoom out, we as individuals disappear. On a planetary scale, we can detect nutrient cycles, so water, carbon, nitrogen. And it's these cycles that characterize Gaia's physiology. It's only when we start to zoom in again that we start to see these streams of nutrients coalescing into knots of biomass, which we call ourselves. So in a very real sense, the processes that keep us alive are the same as the processes that keep Gaia alive. Every atom in your body has passed through countless organisms throughout history. Our bodies are just temporary stops in nutrient cycles much faster and much older than ourselves. And we are just living embodiments of all the creatures that we have ever eaten. For example, every 8 years, your body replaces all of its atoms, yet the overall phenomenon that you call yourself remains. So in a very real sense, death is just an organism's way of becoming many organisms. So how does it feel to know that the water that you drank this morning is now your blood plasma? How does it feel to know that the fats that you have eaten are now the cell membranes of your skin, or that the phosphorus in your bones was mined from rock by the world's first fungi millions of years ago? How does it feel to know that every element in your body was forged in the nuclear furnace of a star that died long before our solar system ever came into being? Most people nowadays don't have any reverence for what they eat. They don't have any personal connections to the landscapes that their food comes from, and they suffer the nutritional deficiencies as a result of having too much dependence on an agricultural system that takes no effort into looking after the planet. In the last 100 years, we've lost most of our crop diversity, and the nutrient content of our food has been in rapid decline. Here's a case in point. Today you have to eat 21 oranges to get the same nutrition as one orange in the 1950s. Now, why is that? It's simply because industry hasn't respected Gaia's nutrient cycles and instead adopted this extractivist mindset that turns living beings into landfill waste as efficiently as possible. So agriculture's priority should be to ensure that the crops grown provide us with the full spectrum of nutrients that we need for full health, and that all of these nutrients get cycled back into the system. So as health-conscious individuals, what we could do is to ensure that we have a wide diversity in our diets. So this could be by eating as many species as we can, especially those high in key nutrients such as antioxidants, polyphenols, essential fatty acids. It's only when we're in our fullest health can we be better denizens of the biosphere. We are the cells of Gaia, after all. But our bodies are more than just chemical activity. They give rise to consciousness. So I'm sure everyone here has had experiences with mind-altering substances, whether it's coffee, alcohol, or psychedelics. Most people nowadays exist in a very narrow range of states, and this lack of experiential diversity keeps their minds locked in ways of thinking that prevents them from seeing the just pure beauty of everyday existence. This is why we need a diversity of nutrients for the mind as much as we need them for the body. In the world of wine tasting, there's a concept known as terroir. It's the distinct flavor of the landscape that's unique to any particular wine. So wines that come from different regions came from grapevines that grew on different soils with different microclimates, different minerals, different pHs. And all of these conditions manifest themselves within the grapes to give their wines a unique flavor profile. I'd like to propose a new concept which I call Psychedelic Terroir. It's the unique experiential profile of psychedelics of the same kind grown in different environments. So, for example, take two magic mushrooms, Psilocybe cubensis, one grown in jars full of grain and the other foraged in the wild in Mexico. Both may contain similar levels of psilocybin, but the one grown in the wild will contain a greater diversity of chemical compounds. Now, this is because in the wild, fungi have to survive through very harsh conditions, competitors, bacteria, insects, and therefore they have to produce a wider array of chemical compounds to defend themselves. And these chemical compounds are unique to their particular ecosystems. So the very tissue of the wild mushroom contains an imprint of its ecosystem that then goes into us as chemical information. So whereas for the mushroom grown on grain, life is fairly simple. And so its biochemical makeup is going to be a lot more simple and one-dimensional. And a greater diversity of chemical compounds may explain the differences in psychedelic experiences when comparing wild species with domesticated ones or ones grown indoors. Take ayahuasca, for example. It's now been shown that the overall experience is way more than just what the DMT and the MAO inhibitor can provide. Other mind-altering substances such as harmine and harmaline also have subtle mind-altering effects, as well as any other herbs that might be included in the brew as well. Now, this might explain why wild mushrooms give much more complex psychedelic experiences than the ones grown indoors. And this might also explain why psychedelic terroir might help us realize that we cannot separate mystical experiences from the molecules that gave birth, or from the landscape that gave birth to its molecules. And this harks back to my previous point. With a greater diversity of nutrients in our bodies, not only are we healthier, but our experience of life is a lot richer. And you may have come across people who insist that psychedelics aren't a valid way of achieving spiritual states of consciousness, claiming that they are natural and that they'd rather use techniques such as meditation and yoga or what have you. What these people miss is the fact that their very neurochemistry, or their very consciousness, is built on a foundation of neurochemistry that comes from the foods that they eat. So, serotonin, for example, the dominant neurochemical in our bodies that gives rise to our ordinary states of consciousness, as well as feelings of pleasure. It's been shown now that serotonin over 90% of it is produced by our gut bacteria, meaning that our consciousness is largely a result of the microbial activity of our digestive systems. What's more, serotonin is also highly dependent on diet. So, for example, eating carbohydrates in the evening can raise serotonin levels and help us feel better the next day. So what this really tells us is that our very consciousness is entirely mediated by chemistry that comes from outside of our bodies. We're all tripping on serotonin right now. We're all high on gut bacteria. So to reject our chemical nature is to remove ourselves from ecology, because the molecules that make up the creatures around you may one day be part of your own body. So when you look out into your garden of fruits and vegetables, you're not just looking at other living beings, you're looking at your future self, because the saps and juices that flow through your plants are soon going to be flowing through your own bloodstream. So ask yourself this question: where do you end and where does the outer world begin? By choosing what to eat, we're choosing what we want to be made of. So are your choices made for the benefit of your health, the health of the planet, the health of future generations? Perhaps when we realize that nutrition is indeed spiritual and that the outside world is our inside world, we may finally start to heal the divide between humans and nature. Thank you.